All right, Bellringer fans, it's Monday. It's the first day of the fourth quarter. If you're watching this, you're in a new classroom and you can't wait to do today's Bellringer. Let's go. All right. Hey now. Mr. Kovacs class. It's Mr. Kovacs class. You might learn a ton. It's Mr. Kovacs class.
He's interesting too.
It's Mr. Kovacs class.
And he's super cool.
It's Mr. Kovacs class. All right, fans. What is that thing? What is that beast? What would you call that? Here, you answer that question for me. It's kind of a trick question because the answer was really all of the above and none of the above. See, you call this beast different common names depending on where you live or what language you might speak, but you call it one scientific name, which is like its universal name. And we're going to talk about how scientists came up with this idea of giving universal names. It's kind of arbitrary, really. It's just a product of humans trying to organize the world around them, a way to organize things based on relationships, right? So this guy's obviously a cat. But what kind of cat is he? How is he related to other cats? How closely related is he to your kitty cat you have at home? Or how closely is he related to a lion in the African savanna or a tiger in the Indonesian rainforest? Those are the things we try to answer with classification, or what we call the science of taxonomy. And the guy who came up with all this was a dude named Carolus Linnaeus. Linnaeus was really into organizing things. He decided it was important to give everything a name which got rid of any confusion. For example, in his time, he was from Sweden, and there was birds that lived in Sweden that were bluish in color, and they called them bluebirds. And then there were birds in other parts of Europe that were also bluish in color that were called bluebirds. And then in the United States, even bluebirds, none of which were the same kind of thing. They all just happened to look blue. So he came up with, why don't we come up with a way to classify organisms, to call them what they are so we could tell the differences between them. And he came up with the idea of binomial nomenclature. Right? You would say that's a bear, but you'd also say, hey, that's a bear. You might even say, no, that's a bear. In fact, you'd be correct, but they are all obviously different versions of the bear. So we have to give them names. And then Linnaeus' idea was give them names from Latin and Greek, which at his time were already classic dead languages. Nobody was speaking them anymore, so he figured they wouldn't change anymore. And, give them a two-part name. The first part is called the genus, which is kind of like the organism's last name. Like, what group is he in? Ursus, which means the bears. And this guy would also be an Ursus, a bear. But they're not the same kind of bear, so you have to give him a second name, which, like Arctos, which means the bear of the north, a northern bear. And now this bear also lives in the north, but spends a lot of time at sea, so he called it Ursus maritimus, or the sea bear. So, yeah. And then what's interesting is we found out this guy, we call him a panda bear, but he's more like a raccoon or a red panda than he is like any of the other bears. He's in a total different genus, the Aleuropoda, which means that he's the bears with cat feet instead of bare feet. And so pretty interesting anyway. Right, and we've been studying the human family tree a little bit, not in a lot of depth, but a little bit over the last few days. And so we were in a group of humans, a group of hominid species known as the homos. These are all very similar to each other, right? We're the only ones left, Homo sapiens, right? And then there was other branches that went into the Australopithecines and the Paranthropus, which all went kind of extinct. We're the only ones left. And then our closest relatives, of course, are the bonobos. They're in a different genus called Pan, right? Let's see, if you could tell me, based on this cladogram, Cladogram. When was Australopithecus sebdia around? Good. How about Homo habilis? Good. How about P. Aethiopicus? Very good. And the common ancestor, of course, of all of these hominids was way back about 7 million years ago. Talked about humans migrated right out of Africa. We're our oldest hominid relatives and our oldest Homo sapiens. So that's where our species first diverged from other homos and other hominid species. But then there were some great migrations. Now remember, look at the time period. 200,000 years ago, it took 150,000 years for big enough populations just to move from Africa to what would be the now modern day Middle East in order to consider it a migration. So it was not a rapid movement by any means. Again, remember, this is when human beings were kind of wild animals. They probably had very small family social structures. They moved around kind of nomadically anyway, living a hunting gathering lifestyle, looking for food, either hunting small animals or collecting local vegetation. There's no sign of agriculture at this time or any kind of animal husbandry, right? And then after the Great Migrations, there continued to be a bunch of other migrations over the course of time until really our species, after about 200,000 years, right, was able to populate most of the planet. And what was really interesting is that civilization as we know it started right about here, okay? So it took, let's say if people had migrated there about 50,000 years ago, it took about 45,000 years in order for people to go from nomadic hunter-gatherers to people who lived in big social groups like towns and cities and would have things like schools and governments and money and art and all those things that you think of that are really human. Those are all very recent, all right? So aren't you glad you're alive now and not 200,000 years ago?